First, I'm going to talk about humanism. And I think I'm going to do what anyone else will do when they're given 10-15 minutes to talk to people. I'm going to talk about myself. But the reason for that is not so much from my own ego, but because I believe that personal stories are more powerful than arguments. I know that no one's life is quite as neat as an ordered philosophical essay, and mine is certainly no different. And so it's this quite messy and quite muddled story that I want to share with you this morning. So I was brought up in a Catholic family in Northern Ireland, and as you can imagine, religion plays a very significant part in that kind of upbringing. So I had Catholic primary school, Catholic secondary school, baptism, first confession, first communion, confirmation. Most of my earliest memories are of some kind of religious ceremony. And as a kid, religion, in my case Catholicism, meant two things. Firstly, it meant stories, nice stories. Stories with heroes and villains, exotic places, brave deeds, and miracles, magic even. Religion was also how I came to be a good person. The only charity I was aware of was always being done through the church. But charity wasn't the only way to be good. To be good was to say your prayers, to go to Mass, to confess, to respect the parish priest. The idea of goodness was at least as much about piety as it was about charity. So I tried to be good. But when I got older, in my later teens, I was hit by that awful revelation that angsty teenagers get hit by all around the world. So I'm going to die. Not anytime soon, of course, but someday there will be no more roaring. None of this, the sun, this earth, my friends, my school, these hands, these eyes, none of them are going to last. All of a sudden, everything just seems so silly. I see people rushing around Belfast shopping, and I want to shake them. Why do you bother? It's just all so pointless. We're all going to die. I was a very optimistic teenager. I needed meaning. I needed it fast. So I turned to the place I'd always been told to look for answers. I turned to my religion. So what was the religious idea of purpose? For me, God's answer to the problem of purpose was, stop worrying. I have my plan for everyone. Just live your life according to my rules, and in this you will find your purpose. It was these first two words that mattered to me most. Stop worrying. That's what I needed. So I stopped worrying. Or I tried to. I liked being a believer. I knew where I was in things, where I stood. I was a something, not a nothing. Calling myself Catholic gave me an existence beyond myself. I had a new history. I had a shared language with strangers. I had beautiful buildings that I could call in some way my own. But I was missing one thing. I didn't have faith. At no stage did I feel anything like what most people called God. And in a way, it's surprising how long it took me to realize that this was a problem for a Christian. I was so keen on having a sense of purpose, on a foundation for morality, of knowing where I was, that I didn't want to address this fundamental flaw. I knew I believed in good, I knew I wanted purpose, and God had to exist for these things to exist. My faith in them was real, and that was enough. God and goodness came as a package deal. And yet today, I'm an atheist. So what changed? Some people talk of the moment when the penny dropped, a kind of sudden realization that they were an atheist. For me, the process was much more gradual, slowly realizing the problems I had with my own religion, and gradually understanding the secular alternatives. I came to realize that I didn't need God to answer these two big questions of morality and purpose. So morality. A big fear for me about a godless world was that human beings would no longer be special. That without the concept of a soul, we were just meaningless atoms interacting that happen to be animate right now, but within about a century, if we're lucky, they'd be dead again. Without God, all we had was science, and science seemed to paint a pretty bleak picture of what human beings actually were. The answer to this came from me in the form of a parable, a secular parable. It's very short, and I'd share it with you today. So there's a couple, and they have a beautiful baby daughter called Mary. And they engage in a very unusual experiment. They're going to bring up Mary in an entirely black and white world. And that's not morally black and white, but literally black and white without colour, and all the shades of grey in between. I'll think through them. And she can see perfectly well, but they do everything that they need to do. They dye her skin grey, and they make sure that their skin is grey with charcoal, however they do it. But they give her an excellent education. I guess she's school at home, and her teachers come in and they must have to grow up, and so on. And she becomes a scientist. And not just any scientist, but irony of irony, she becomes an expert in the human eye and how the eye perceives colour. She's a world expert on it, although of course she never leaves this little house of hers, this grey house, because of this experiment of her parents. Then one day the parents say, well, Mary, you're 50 years old, how about you go outside? And Mary goes outside. So put yourself in Mary's shoes as she steps outside into the world, our world, of colour for the first time. What does sight must be for her? No amount of studying, of learning of facts, will prepare her for the actual experience of colour. This is new. She knew everything there was to know about wavelength, about the retina and the optic nerves and whatever it is that goes on in there. But she had no idea what it was to actually experience colour. This is new. The red of sunsets, the blues of the sky, the greens and browns of earth. As a scientist, she knew everything about these colours, but as a human being, she knew nothing about what it was to experience them. Now, this secular parable requires no mention of God to be true. There is a difference between knowledge and experience, between knowing the science behind the sunset and knowing what it is to sit back after a tiring day and watch one sink over the horizon. There's a difference between speaking of evolution, genetics, hormones, and endorphins, and actually being in love. The loss of religious belief does not mean humans become mere atoms. To say that there's something special and real about human experience is not as crazy and hippie as I first thought. And what about meaning? Could a life without God still have this meaning I was looking for? Could it still have some kind of purpose? As a Catholic, I was convinced that to lose belief in God was to lose meaning in life. This is perhaps the biggest barrier to atheism for me, to humanism. Without divine purpose, the godless life, I believed, loses much of the purpose bestowed on it by religions. Well, I actually still agree. I do think that it loses much of that purpose. What I'm not convinced of, however, is that this is a bad thing. This realization comes from looking at the most important things in life. I think we all agree that love is a good thing. But why do we do it? Why do we bother falling in love? Is it to gain the money of our lover? Is it because we simply must spread our DNA, our genes? Is it because that's just what society expects us to do? Why fall in love? My answer, and what I'm sure will be most people's answer, would be that we fall in love for the sake of it. That's it. We fall in love for love's own sake, because it is better. And what about the rest of the best in life? Why do we make friends? Why do we tell jokes? Why do we help those in need? Is it because we expect to gain anything from it? Is it because someone has told us to? Of course not. We are better lovers, better friends, better parents, better human beings when we do something for the sake of doing it. Because it is right. Because it is beautiful. And life, why not live for the sake of living. Why not live as we would hope to love? Why not live as we would hope to make friends? We seek no meaning for love, no meaning for friendship, no meaning for beautiful music. And I feel that we should seek a meaning for life. Live life for its own sake. Find its meaning in special moments, and not its overarching plan. To discovering humanism, I have found a home. I have found a philosophy that fits. A way of life that makes sense, both here and here. I could wish nothing greater for anyone else, in whatever form it takes.